Well, thank you very much. This is the first of a new cycle of training covering topics which should be of interest to support colleagues around the world. We're going to be looking at a number of different things. I think everyone now has seen the schedule, and it's based on requests that we received about learning topics. And today we're going to be looking at basic Sage CRM installation and settings. So really thinking about the initial installation of Sage CRM. I get to take quite a high view because there are a number of resources that we'll see later on that provide quite a bit of detail in terms of sizing of resources that you need, and there's obviously the documentation that talks you through it. So I'm going to try and put things into context. One of the hardest things about learning Sage CRM is really when you are starting to face learning and such a complex piece of software like Sage CRM is that you tend to look at things through the letterbox. So you're only looking at small areas at a time. And here I want to step back and put this into the context that, say, a consultant belonging to a partner may face when they come to install Sage CRM for the first time. So we're going to be looking and thinking about the deployment options, the architecture and the design. We're going to be looking at some of the skills, therefore, that are required really for a successful implementation. The presentation is going to be about 45 minutes, and we're then going to open this up for conversation and chat, so you can ask me follow-up questions. Now, we are dealing with a topic that is a broad topic focused on Sage CRM, and this is backed by different resources and documentation. And the first place to obviously look at is help.sagecrm.com. Now, I'm reminding people about this is because when we look at the analytics for the community and for the Help Center, one of the odd things is that the analytics indicate that the Help Center doesn't get the same level of traffic as the community, and the Help Center really is the first place if people are wanting to find out information about how to do things, how to install things, how to configure things. So help.sagecrm.com provides all the documentation for the supported releases. We also have the integrated e-learning, and that's on the community. And even as we're preparing to migrate the blogs from sagecrm.com, so community.sagecrm.com to Sage City, e-learning is still going to be there. It's still going to be the focus really of the ability to access topics by broad area. And the videos that you see up on the e-learning area are actually hosted on the YouTube channel, and you can find this. It's the support and training channel for Sage underneath YouTube, and that represents there with the youtube.com/c/Sage North America is the shortcut to it. And although it's a North Americans originated support and training YouTube channel, it's actually got loads of stuff that we're putting up on there as well. So preparing for implementation, that's what we're looking at now, and that's what I want to consider in the next few slides. Probably the best place to start is to understand why we run into problems in projects anyway. This is based on some of the training that I do with David Beard for implementation consultants and colleagues, and David has just been running a series of training events in Singapore and taking part in the Sage Asia conference using some of this material as well. One of the big problems that customers face when coming with Sage CRM is that they don't have a clear view of what they want out of the implementation, and that's starting to indicate for us that really our Sage partners who are acting as the IT consultants for our customers need to have a very strong view about the purpose of what they're doing. It doesn't really matter in a way what the technology is if they don't understand what the technology is designed to do in terms of the system that is being implemented. Then all other problems, technical problems, will arise from that, because you start off with wrong assumptions about the requirements, about the technical infrastructure that is needed. And so poor requirements definition is the area that needs to be looked at. One of the things I'm working on at the moment with colleagues in L3 is actually a questionnaire that is designed to make sure we understand what is currently within the system and what is required for future use. It's a way of thinking about trying to capture the problems before even the implementation begins. So understanding that projects fail because we have not properly identified the requirements for that system, we then move on into the question of really, do we hope this project is going to be able to do everything that we have identified? So let's assume that we have a clear view of what is needed. We run into problems within projects when we're trying to balance the time available, the cost in terms of the amount of resources that is available to us, and the project scope, what we intend for the project to do. And if we think about Sage CRM, Sage CRM advertises itself as being the sales, marketing and service modules for a Sage accounting system. So it's the front office side. But do we have, within the time that's available for that project and the competence of the consultants, the ability to be able to be confident to implement, say, the marketing and the service aspects of the system? Wouldn't it be better probably to manage the risk and to be focused on the actual immediate needs and just look at the implementation of the sales side of Sage CRM? And this gives rise to really how we approach the whole question of the implementation, this sense that we need to make sure we've gathered our requirements, both for the business and technically what Sage CRM requires, planning that initial installation, and then once we have got a vanilla install of Sage CRM, moving to change CRM so that it is closer to the requirements of the customer. And what we see in here is a three-phase approach, which looks like it's a linear approach, but really we never stop designing and we never stop building as we move to production. This is because of the nature of Sage CRM being a metadata-driven application, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So installation and requirements gathering is really the fundamental of what we need to do. And then when it comes to the configuration of Sage CRM, everything else is based on that work that we do. We can approach an implementation project in really three ways. So if you've got lots and lots of resources, then you have the widest choice about what you can do as far as implementing Sage CRM. But it boils down to, are we going to go with a big bang adoption? So if you've got integrated Sage CRM, you are definitely going to be going with not only sales, marketing and customer service, but you're also going to be turning on the integration from day one to the accounting software. Or you take an approach where you are actually working on, you're just going to go with sales, then marketing, then service, and then perhaps you'll have had, after sales, you'll have turned on the integration with the accounting system. So it might be turn on Sage CRM, get Sage CRM working, get the sales team working, and then look at integrating with the accounting system, Sage 300, or in most of the territories around the world, Sage 100 within Germany and Sage 200 within the UK. Parallel adoption is when you might have two teams working both for the implementation of the accounting system and the integration, and another team working on specifically customizing the Sage CRM team around the customer's requirements. You can identify here there are different complexities involved in each approach, with probably the big bang adoption and the parallel adoption containing the higher risks compared with the phased adoption. The phased adoption there probably represents the lowest risk, and here you can see a typical way of implementing the system. If the customer's main requirements, and again, this is all about identifying what are the main requirements for the customer, and projects 50% of projects fails because requirements have not been properly identified. You work out what does the customer actually need. And if we have got a conversation with a consultant who is approaching implementation, these are the sorts of conversations they need to be encouraged to demonstrate that they have thought through with their customer, instead of just implementing Sage CRM as though it's a single thing. So customer service, sales, and marketing might be a relatively good way of phasing the adoption of Sage CRM, rolling it out, initially carrying out the installation, and then passing it out into the different departments represented within the organization. But when we're working with Sage CRM, you can have different project management approaches. And Sage CRM has been implemented within prompt and Prince2, waterfall type implementations. It's been implemented with DSDM, dynamic methods of implementation, but typically you are looking at some sort of iterative development approach with Sage CRM, whether this is a big bang or whether it is a phased approach. You start off gathering the requirements, planning for Sage CRM, trying to working out the business needs and the analysis, and therefore the design for each individual screens that you need, implementing that, making sure that you've got Sage CRM in a point where you can test it and the customer is happy, and then you're implementing it and going live, and then going with the evaluation of that tells you whether or not you've got those assumptions right, and you want to be able to fine-tune the requirements, and therefore leading on to further design and changes to the design of Sage CRM, and so on through that. Sage CRM is not a static, done and dusted application. It is highly configurable. You're always going to be tuning Sage CRM around the needs of the business. So setting that out as some of these broad management concerns, I want to look now at the options that we face as we come to deploy Sage CRM. Sage CRM is working with the Sage 200 cloud family of products, and Sage CRM's own adoption mechanisms are actually very similar to products, whether it is Sage X3 or whether it is Sage 200, or indeed some of the options around our customers deploying for any Sage accounting system. And we have this idea underneath Sage CRM that it is, of course, looking at modules for sales, marketing, and customer service. We have to think in terms of those integrated with the accounting system. And we have a choice of implementation. We can go with the classic on-premise approach, which is implementing Sage CRM on the customer's own system. And that's where the customer takes full responsibility for the hardware and software maintenance. You can go with the private cloud implementation, and many partners, I know many partners in the UK, work on the basis of essentially a managed service where the partner through the customer is responsible for the software maintenance. And you could also go with a virtual private cloud where you are certainly using things like the Amazon or Azure platforms where there's a shared infrastructure and there is responsibility for managing that upgrade for operating systems for the software as well. So the ownership of the system still resides with the customer in terms of responsibility for maintenance, but they may well then contract that out to partners to be able to work through. So there is a choice of slicing and dicing Sage CRM in any way that they like. And if you're going down the route of a cloud implementation, you do have to remember the complexity that Sage CRM presents, the way in which it works in terms of the interfaces that we have, how it can be accessed, how it can be consumed, and how it integrates with other applications as well. So we have CRM existing in a complex environment, and where we are implementing ourselves, we do have to pay attention to the requirements of CRM, especially within the database area. Now here you can see that I'm looking at server hardware recommendations. I would refer you to some training videos that are up on the Sage CRM YouTube playlist, and this will talk through the considerations of server hardware recommendations very carefully. But even if you are going, it doesn't matter what our deployment options are, whether they are on-premise or where you're on your own managed machines, whether you're in a virtual private cloud or a hybrid cloud environment, you still have to think through, what are my physical requirements for my system? How many users do you have? What is the minimum requirement for each of the machines within the network? And these may well change in each version of Sage CRM. So this slide represents 2019 R2, and I believe there's going to be some recommendation changes for 2020 R1. So when it comes to look at the documentation, it's well worth looking at. So this is drawn from the documentation, but presented in graphical form rather than in simple text form. So you can see where we are identifying how many users that we have. If there are over 50 users, we're being asked whether there are over 200 users, but let's assume that there's no more than 50 users, but they're very intensive call center or telesales people, then in which case you may end up wanting to separate the database server and the web server across two machines and have different capacities for the machines. Now, we have different requirements, and those requirements may cope with the idea of a very large scale scaling as well. So you can start off with, you've got your database on one server, but you may find there are up to 4 servers being required because of the scaling, and you can apportion different services to those different servers as well. This is in the context of you might have a database server and 3 web servers servicing Sage CRM. This isn't about this lesson is not about looking at the implementation of a multi-server environment, but simply trying to indicate that Sage CRM can get complex really very quickly, and we need to be prepared to think about how this is implemented. And this can all be done whether they are on-premise or whether these are servers that are virtual servers up within the cloud as well. And we have an environment in which our cloud conversations take place, working with a whole range of different external third-party software, and configuring for that web ecosystem or cloud ecosystem is going to be a very important consideration for us. Part of this is really making sure that we understand the different moving parts that exist within Sage CRM. And that's the idea of the multi-server environment is essentially down to taking the strain off a particular server trying to do everything. Let's look now at the hybrid architecture to see really what we can do in terms of understanding what's happening within Sage CRM. First of all, I'm going to start with a little bit of a history lesson. When Sage CRM was created, it was, and I joined the company in 2021. Sorry, I joined it in 2001. So I joined now 18 years ago. Back then, there was a very straightforward architecture where CRM, or eWare as it was known, was installed on an application server, and it had a very simple 3-schema architecture where you had the interface was provided with the consumer through the browser, and you had the application server which looked after everything. At the heart of it, it was a ISAPI extension called eWare DLL, working with IIS, Internet Information Services, within a Windows Server environment, and talking through to the database through ADO, and the database was possibly on another machine. So you can set this up, so you can see the way in which you can communicate. There are different firewalls available, but ultimately there was a single structure, which is the eWare DLL. That's still the heart of CRM. Most of the system screens that you see will be served up because you are calling an interface through the eWare DLL. So the eWare DLL, for all of the main application screens like company, person, for all of the opportunities, cases, etc. These are all screens driven through eWare DLL, and even workflow, for example, is driven through the eWare DLL. Now, associated with the eWare DLL are a number of services that, again, are on this application server, and they are responsible for a number of different tasks, like the Mail Manager, and I'll explain a little bit more about the Mail Manager in a moment, but the Mail Manager essentially can interact with the server, monitoring email accounts. The escalation server is there, working on the basis of time, so it can allow for the monitoring of data within CRM based on the passage of time, driving automated tasks inside the environment. The indexing server and the quick find are, well, they probably give you an indication from their names that they are interacting with the database and interacting with the eWare DLL in order to make sure for the indexing the search information is fast. That's the keyword search, and the quick find is another service which allows for that in menu typing in of the information. So those are the services that sit alongside helping the interface working with the eWare DLL. Now, all of our APIs that are COM-based or .NET-based are also interacting with the eWare DLL. Ultimately, the ASP environment is working with COM, so COM objects and that are instantiated within ActiveX page, which are instantiated within inside the ASP page, which interact with the eWare DLL, exposing the objects and methods that we can use to develop our extensions. The .NET application extension is essentially using an COM interop bridge and is therefore based on the same technology. And what you don't see here is also SOAP. The SOAP web services are interacting with the eWare DLL as well. Sage CRM has got a very, very wide range of APIs that are available to it. And most recently, we've started to add in other APIs, but that are based on the newer side of the architecture. From version 7 of Sage CRM, which is now pushing on about, well, I'd say over 10 years ago, we added in a system based on an extension to the architecture on Apache Tomcat, so a Java-based set of technologies. So the big division is between this eWare DLL, which is a COM-based interaction, very much based on older technologies, and then the Apache Tomcat, which is based on Java and a set of different tools there, which working with web apps to allow us to create smaller sectional areas of functionality. Now we do that, we implemented the Apache Tomcat server largely to allow us to move faster and use a wider library of third-party components for everything from mail merge through to data import through to dashboard technologies, etc. So the Apache Tomcat was added in from version 7. It represents the direction of travel. So any new feature, for example, is really working around the Apache Tomcat and Java technologies. Things like the integration with MailChimp, for example, works on that basis. Now, we're still going to be driving the main interface through the eWare DLL. So what happens is that there is, for parts of the application that are driven by or rest on the Java technologies, there's a redirection that takes place. So the request comes into the main interface, but is then redirected off to those bits that are delivered using the Java technology, and the Java technology is on the server, on the application server, is then talking through to the database server through JDBC. So there's going to be two areas in which, when we think about doing tasks like migration of servers, you're going to have to be looking at settings to confirm that all the not only are the right settings are in place for the eWare DLL, but there's also the right settings are in place for the Java application as well. Now, I'm sure you may well have some questions about that, but I want to deep dive into some of the details of really these services and the web apps that we're looking at. So you've got a range of different applications. When a request comes in, we'll find that there's a redirection from IIS to Java through what we call SData. Now, SData is a specification that Sage drew up some years ago to allow for a standardized approach for a lot of its applications that were being cloud enabled, so allow for RESTful integration. Standing for Sage Data, it was similar to the idea of G-Data or Google Data, creating a standardized way of presenting the information. It was originally very much based on XML rather than, say, JSON as the mechanism, but there has been some continual development around these items. But basically, the Tomcat web apps, which are all working with the requests that come in and are redirected. These are all the Java technologies that sit here, and you've got a range of different things that you might see. If you're working with the integration with an accounting system that makes use of this, there'll be the CRM Sync Engine web app. If you're working with Exchange, there's the Exchange Sync web app. The one that has disappeared now is the SP Sync Engine, because SwiftPage no longer exists as a product, so we're not integrating with that. But you can see that there will be different web apps present that are doing different jobs, interacting with the database. And this is part of the joy of that web app application, because you can create smaller web apps that do specific things rather than trying to load everything in. One of the difficulties for our developers was that the eWare DLL was getting very, very large because of the complexity, but the ability to break down into separate web apps was a useful approach for us to do things inside the CRM once we had implemented this as an architecture. Now, how these requests come in, if we think about what happens to anything that is redirected, we have the request may originate within a browser, but actually, strictly speaking, we need to think of them as an S-data consumer or a REST consumer. The term we're now using very much the term REST to describe the S-data. S-data is simply the way in which things are structured and designed, specific to Sage CRM. REST is the general term, representational state transfer. Is the technology, but when we make a request in from a device to say, give me some data, what happens is that it's coming in through to the web server, redirected to the Apache Tomcat web apps, which then in turn make the request into Sage CRM. Now, Sage CRM has, whether it is dealing with the eWare DLL or the Apache Tomcat web apps, they have understanding of all of the aspects of metadata. Within the new technologies, this is done through a whole set of tables which are stored within Hibernate, and they look after that. So all of these different services as well have knowledge of Sage CRM. All of them are working with the correct technology in order to make sure that the requests are managed. Now, going back into just one of the services that I showed you, which was the Advanced Mail Manager or the Mail Manager, this is a service that runs. It's actually based on the eWare DLL technology, so it's COM-based. Its job is to monitor email accounts. So imagine where you've got this Advanced Email Manager. The Advanced Email Manager service is running. It's configured to point to certain known email accounts, and it will check them on a periodic basis. So that might be configured every 3 minutes. It might be configured every 5 minutes. And what will happen is it will look into an email address account. So support at Panoply, for example. So imagine a customer has sent an email in saying, I need support on a particular area. The Advanced Email Manager is looking at that email account and can read it. Now, it will associate that email account with a script, a set of instructions about what it should do if it detects an email in that account. Now, we call those scripts templates, and the Advanced Mail Manager will look at the email, look at the template, and then process that according to the template. Now, that might mean that it will automatically file the email inside Sage CRM. It looks at the email and says, I can see who this email is from. I can check to see whether this is a known user, company, or person inside Sage CRM, and then create that inside Sage CRM. I could automatically reply back to the customer, and I can even, once it's inside Sage CRM, attach it to a particular workflow or do some other tasks like creating a case or an opportunity automatically. And it will, of course, then tie in, once that data arrives inside Sage CRM, it will tie in with other automated behavior within CRM, including workflow and escalations. So that it could lead on with Sage CRM users getting messages that they have to act on this inbound email. So that's just one of the examples of what this service is doing, and giving you a sense that there's a lot of areas that need to be configured and changed once Sage CRM is implemented. We're trying to, within our roadmap, we're trying to add more and more items into CRM to make it a better experience for partners and customers when it comes to using the system and diagnosing what moving part may be failing. And here you can see that there's the administration system health page, which is able to diagnose whether, say, the Apache Tomcat part of the application is working correctly, whether the APIs, the SData and SData 2.0 APIs, which are actually the REST-based APIs, are working correctly, or whether or not some of the Java Tomcat web apps, like the Exchange synchronization, is running or not. And you can see it even includes the services as well, so the CRM escalation service and the indexing service. So these are, this is a tool inside Sage CRM which is attempting to make things easier for us. Okay. Now, we're running towards the end of what I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to step back. I've talked about the architecture. I've talked about that you have different broad options for deployment. Let's have a look at some of the specifics in terms of implementations and what we need to think about. Here is a typical configuration when you're inside an organization. Let's assume that you are a business partner and basically you've gone ahead and you've downloaded the install package and set up for Sage CRM, and you've just run it on your Windows 10 laptop. So you run it on your Windows 10 laptop, and you've even installed, for example, the sample 2014 database. So you've got a database server which is on your laptop, but it could be on a different machine. You've got your own application server, which has got your web server and the Sage CRM all installed together. And so the Sage CRM is installed on the IIS server. And then you see that you then access it from your browser on your laptop, or you could, because your machine sits there on your little local area network, you could go along to a corporate, to another laptop, and as long as you know your web server address, you could probably browse to it. You'd have to configure it to allow that to happen, but basically you're all in the same organization. It's a very easy setup. There's no question that you're accessing this from outside of your network. You can extend CRM by creating your own ASP pages. You're adding in .NET assemblies that extend the interface. You can also start to add in other calls. So, for example, and this, by the way, might be starting to move in the direction of integration with an accounting system. So you can add in integration where the third-party system is making calls to CRM, or in fact CRM is making calls to it. So it's a bidirectional implementation. But the chances are you're going to want to set up Sage CRM so that people on the move can access CRM. So you're going to need to think in terms of, how do I set up a web server for access outside the corporate network? And we're going to have to start thinking in terms of HTTPS being configured. You want to make sure that all of the integration, all of the interactions are over a secure TLS rather than an unsecure simple port 80 HTTP request. So thinking in terms of exposing this, adding in a firewall, and only allowing certain interactions from the internet, and you may even be working on the basis of a VPN as well. If you are working on the basis of that, you also have to think about what devices are you being used, whether that's the mobile devices as well. And so that's mobile devices include whether you're using the mobile theme or whether you're using a mobile app. So now just about the where I started to indicate that it gets complex when you're thinking about integrated systems as well. And Sage CRM has a variety of different integrations that we can work with. We are integrating with Exchange, we're integrating with MailChimp, we're integrating with accounting systems. And when it comes to the Sage 300 cloud interactions, we have to make sure that Sage CRM is configured in such a way as can receive and make the necessary Sage CRM web services passing from Sage 300 into Sage CRM, and whether there is actually the ability to make use of the web screens within inside Sage 300 as well. So there's a lot of different mechanisms that we can use within inside this, and they all have to be configured, and you always have to go to the correct documentation for these, and especially when you're dealing with something as complex as the Sage 300 implementation. Now, I'm just putting that outside there. There are different equivalent ones. You may well be using a third-party integration. For example, you may well be using, in Germany, you've got the Sage 100 Sellmore integration. There are different integrations, each with their own documentation, each with their own requirements that need to be looked at, and you need to factor that into the design of the systems. Lastly, let's assume that we have implemented Sage CRM and we are comfortable with what we've got. We've got Sage CRM installed. You're able to open up the screens. You're able to log on. You're able to navigate around the system, and the system diagnostics are indicating that everything is working as they should. Then what we also need to think about is how we customize, and this is where we need to understand that Sage CRM is very much a metadata driven system. So Sage CRM screens are defined inside the database, and we call this set of data within the system the metadata, because if it changes, then it changes CRM. Meta is the Greek word for change or beyond or above. It's a funny word in Greek. So it's a data about data, and it allows us to define what the fields are called, how fields should be displayed, what are the rules around those fields, whether they are mandatory, whether they have certain allowed values associated with them, and there's even the ability to have certain permissions associated with those fields, all not just at the field level but also at the screen level, and all defined through system administration screens without need for any code. We can add code into the screens, but a lot of customization takes place without any code whatsoever. We can define these for any of the out-of-the-box screens, and the same approach is used by new screens built for the customer. The point is that metadata is used whether or not we've built the screens for use in the standard user interface, or whether we have built the screens which ultimately are called through the .NET or ASP pages. The screens look and behave the same for the customer, but most of the work is done through these settings. And if we think about a Sage CRM screen, I'm going to jump ahead to just a moment. You see this screen here. This is a company screen. Imagine the company screen that you've seen for Sage CRM. That screen that you see is called from the eWare DLL. So the eWare DLL is providing the base application skeleton. The eWare DLL knows all about certain actions that can be invoked. So it's got a library of internal actions. We call these action codes are all associated with inside Sage CRM with knowing what screen it should call up and what that screen in turn calls up through its association with a particular metadata definition. The screen is also built through, of course, references to style sheets. And within the screens itself, we're going to have different styles being used, but more importantly, there are different areas of a screen where the action may, if you like, call a container. The container contains many different screen elements. The URLs that we see pass in the information that are needed. And if you look at a Sage CRM URL, you'll see various variables called SID and key, and they're all indicating the state of the system. The action element tells it what screen is being used. Once you know those, and the associated metadata is used for all of those individual screens. You can't change the action codes, but what you can do is you can change what the action code presents, because you can change the definition of the screen elements. And we can add in our own new versions of these screen elements by creating new tabs which call our own custom behavior. If you're using the .NET API to extend the interface, or you're using the classic ASP pages to extend the interface, you can see these represented on the right-hand side of the screen. They make calls through to the eWare DLL for screen resources. You'll see that you'll be creating a screen. That screen will be based on definitions that are held inside the metadata tables. Metadata tables include the containers that are the overall page, that's custom screen. Within that, there'll be custom edits and so on. So we can literally pull a screen together, including the captions, the translations for every single point within the screen, back into the system. And it doesn't matter whether those definitions are pointing to a CRM table, a table within the CRM database, or whether they're pointing to a database that sits into a third-party system. Because we haven't covered here the idea that Sage CRM can not only have additional tables added to its database, but it can actually point to completely separate databases to allow us to create screens to manage data that sits in another system, either managed by simply viewing the information, or actually managing and creating input, insert, update, and delete. So when we look at a screen, the screens themselves are highly customizable because we have control over the tab groups, all of the translations that you see on the screens, all of the buttons that you see on the screens, including their linking into security, workflow aspects, and each of the individual fields. There are some screens that we cannot change the fundamental structure of, but what that structure contains, we have complete control of. Even things like the coaching captions, we have control over that. And you certainly can change things like graphics that are used within the screen. That just about brings me to what I wanted to cover in today. So let's see if we've got any questions.